So we thought to do like more a discussion, and we don't know if it fine without the microphone. Can you hear us? No. Okay. So and now it's there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we'll try to be swift with this mic passing, but this is meant to be like very much a discussion. And feel free to also, if you have a question at a certain point, feel free to jump into that. We would welcome that very much. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here. This is my second time presenting in Tallinn Photomonth, and it's always with a jacket and stuff in this cold, really Estonian setting, which I appreciate. So thanks to Laura and Kadri, especially from the Photomonth team, for having us and for having this discussion. And thanks to Lugemik for publishing this book together. So I'll quickly introduce the participants, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the idea and how the book came together, and then we'll move to discuss some specific works in the book and open up some questions that we think the book sort of touches on, as that are quite interesting in the contemporary setting. So this is Kristina Õllek, one of the two local artists in the project. So she's a visual artist based in Tallinn. This is Hanna Putz, an visual artist based between Berlin and Vienna, and Rye Dag Holmboe, a writer and a lecturer at the University College of London. And on full paper, I'm an artist and curator from living between Vilnius and London. So this project, which is called Too Good to Be Photographed, this book that we're launching today, the second launch, is an outcome of a project that took me roughly 2 years to do, and it was based on my interest on the notion of failure in photography, and I was interested why. So my starting point was this idea that somehow you can fail more in photography than you can fail in other media. So what would be called experimentation in illustration would be somehow a failure or a mistake in photography because of this, of course, technical aspect and this historical long tradition that photography somehow has this relationship with truth. And I started contacting artists or photographers that I knew of, and sort of pitching this idea, pitching my interest, and then asking, would you have something to show? What would you think about this project? Would it be interesting for you to participate, and would you have something to share with regards to failure? And the response was usually really positive. So people would say, I mean, as simple as that sounds, but they would say, yes, of course, failure is part of my practice. It's such a strong part that is underrepresented, and we should talk more about it. And what I learned that failure is it's both a very subjective term, but it opens up a lot of discourse and opens up a lot of questions about contemporary art and about contemporary art practice and being an artist in today's time, where you have this pressure, various pressures, and also this idea that somehow failure and success are two opposite sides, which I think this project challenges hopefully a little bit. Can I get so what you see the image here is the cover of the book, and so the book comes in two versions. One is this one with purple and green, and another one is the other two, yellow and gray. And this was my attempt to sort of, when I got all the works, I was trying to make to make sense of them, to make sense of these works that I had. So I put them in these two axes. So one of them, it goes, so from left to the right, goes from technical to personal, and up to down is conceptual and experiential. So these were the categories, of course very subjective, just my way of mapping it out, mapping all the works out. and it helped me somehow to see how different they are and how failure can really mean different things. So I'll just start showing a couple of examples that are quite extreme. So I'll start with this example that is on the lower right-hand corner. This, I thought, is the most personal and experiential piece, which is by a photographer from US called Cole Kelly. And he's now a respected photographer in the sense that he's also doing quite a lot of commercial work. So he's not only exhibiting, but doing quite well in this commercial field. And what he sent were one of his earliest pictures in the book. And basically what he said is that this person that you see in the photograph was the initiative that he started taking photographs, and he took this serious to show his feelings toward this person, to show sort of this love, this affection. And he said this is a failure because nothing happened. Like nothing happened from these feelings. So this is as personal as you could get, and of course very poignant, very sensitive. And there is this. I wanted to find his text to read it. Yes, here it is. So probably you had a chance to look at the book. So the structure is that each work starts with a text, which is from our conversation with the artist. So this text would be suggested by myself, and it's either from emails or from Skype, and it's meant to be quite informal. The sort of descriptions why they would think this is a failure. And then you open it up, and this opening up was, we were thinking of different ways how to structure the work and how to show the images because they're all so different. But this opening up is sort of this metaphorical gesture, which means that both photographers open them up by showing these really sensitive works that, and they put your name on it, which is quite great. And then this is a gesture that suggests that you get a bit deeper into this work, that you do something, you really concentrate on it. So I'll read his text, which I think is quite beautiful. So he said, this is what he wrote to me in an email. The person I was in love with in high school, rendered here as a shapeless nightmare, did not love me. I picked up the camera in an attempt to control the mystery of what was haunting my dreams. My pictures of this person are a failure, as they couldn't prove my love or change his mind. And I think there's something in the images that reflects this haunting quality that he talks about. And then, I will probably switch to another work, which is very different. So this is more in my this axis, which is of course just one way of thinking about this work. This is a work by British photographer Ryan Moule, who works with black and white images, and the specificity of his work is that these images are chemically unfixed. So when he exhibits them, it's always in a red light, because they slowly fade, and this red light helps him to slow down this process. It doesn't stop completely, but it slows down this process. So if you go on the first day of the exhibition, you still see the images, but if you go on the last day, there would be almost nothing there. So this time element comes into the work. So what was interesting for me is that, of course, these images, as they're represented in the book, they don't exist anymore, because these were scanned probably like a year ago when when we send those. So they don't exist anymore. But there's another level is that there's this ground story in photography theory that somehow the photography theory presents this big narrative of fixed images, of these inventions leading towards today, which he's interested to put a bit into dialogue with and to show that there's this, what could be called liquid intelligence, following Jeff Wall, has a place in photography theory, and it's like a really important part of it. But it's also inability to fix the image and inability for image to be representable. So basically, these two examples, I just wanted to start to show two very different work that is part of the same project, and then would like to ask the two artists present to talk a little bit about their work. So I'll start with Kristina, with you. That's okay. So could you tell a little bit about how you came into the project and how does your work fit in this framework?
Hi. In general, I would like to add that in my in all of my works, I guess, there is the notion of failure, or the notion of photography, photographical question. But to see how do we perceive things, and how does the representation work in a sense, if we see an image. And when you approached me and asked if I would be interested to be part of this project, I started to think about not about limitations or the technical aspects of photography, but more deeply about what happens with all those images that we are constantly taking, and especially at the moment when we have digital technology, and that allows us and even leads us to take more photographs every day, and we kind of start to have this big archive, which just stays in a shape of data, but doesn't become modified to the degree, and it doesn't become visible. It just like stays somewhere, just as in a memory in a sense. And I started to think about how when I'm developing an art project and testing out the ideas, like the in between images that come, like starting from A and getting to B, there is always this kind of testing out or trying out situation, and these images which are in this time frame just stay somewhere, but doesn't become a work of art in that sense, but just as a leading point to some further artworks. And I looked through some folders, and I saw those images, which are also here represented in the book, and I felt that I really like them as images, but I just don't see like the time or the place where I could show them, or what kind of context, because when I was taking them, they came to doubling up for the notion that I was looking for. I was working on my master's project, which was thinking about the idea of representation, and when I took those images, I felt that these photographs were like kind of pressing it too directly, and I didn't want to happen. But yeah, so it was in the case now when I have them here in the book, you have an impression like how when these images have become like modified and visible, is it now not anymore failure? Although like it's not represented in that context where it was meant to be at first, but it kind of has changed the status. So and then Hanna also commented it before, like my favorite I can do too. Or do some.
We can talk about
yeah.
turn off the microphone situation. I'm much louder than yours. I'm fine, everyone. Am I too loud? I'm cold. So yeah, we were talking about it before, and I was just saying that the because she said that those were actually images that were not supposed to be shown in a way, and that when Paul approached her, she was saying that she then thought of these images and now is showing them. So we went into a discussion of thinking about what changes an image in the sense of in which context you are showing it. Obviously, there's a difference between having an image on your computer and only you see it and you're thinking about it, or if it's in a gallery or if it's in a museum, if you show it to people in a slideshow, etc. So the context, what if you then you have a nicely framed artwork, then you have it accompanied by a text by a wonderful curator, and it's a very great gallery. It changes an image. An image is obviously not just the image; it is also what is around it and in which context people bring it. And I thought that that was interesting that you said that. That those were, in a sense, fake images that you would have normally not shown, and now that can be the question if it has now changed. What does it do to the actual work now that it's seen, and that it is official in a way? Because failure is obviously something that is, on the one hand, extremely private, but on the other side, it is also very the opposite word for it, like official. It's extremely public. There is, to me, like the sense of like a public failure, if you want it like that, could be a consensus of everyone saying this is obviously not art or this is a fake image. And then an artist can still, as a private decision, still say, and I think that is actually very important that artists do that, they can say, no, fuck you, it's not. This is, to me, not a fake image. And then sometimes the cliche story of art, maybe sometimes 10 years later, it will be shown that this was not a failure. It was a question of time that people were maybe not ready for it or not. Or maybe 10 years later, it's still a shit work and no one ever remembers.
But maybe what's interesting regarding this, what you said that these were sort of, even if you consider these works in some ways failure, they were still interesting for you, right? So they were just complex images that were interesting but didn't find home. And as one artist put it quite nicely in the book, he said when he suggested me some work, Carlos Lowenstein, who's from US, he said these are orphan images. He said, I like them, I keep coming back to them, but there's no platform for them. And he said, I really appreciate that there's something like that. And that there's another aspect that is for me quite interesting, and this is something that we talked a little bit in New York in the panel discussion there last week, is that while success is somehow in a past tense, so success happened, and it's you move on, on something else. So it's somehow finite, it's somehow restricted. But failure lingers on. It's this unrealized potential. So something might still happen. And this, sometimes it's, I guess, the sort of easy lesson to take from it is that it's good to be open to these, what you think is failures, and just think them through and see possibilities. Possibilities to realize these works. Okay, so I'll pass the same question to you. So what was how does your work fit, and where does failure come into it? I mean, we talk about failure as a word, but what's maybe it's quite important to say that what we mean by failure is in English and especially in American sort of way of using failure. Failure and success has these totalizing qualities. So something is failure, so that means it failed, it's really bad, and something is successful. Well, for example, the canonical translation of the word failure in Lithuania, which is how I was thinking about this, is nesėkmingas, which is the opposite of being lucky.
Same in Estonia.
But we were talking that you have two words, right? For failure.
But viga is mistake and ebaõnnestumine is still like failure more.
Okay, so that's quite interesting because it's the etymology of failure is being lacking something or being unsuccessful. So I think these words are a bit more closer to the original and being more. So it's a bit more circumstantial in some way. It is not necessarily your fault when you say nesėkmingas, you just were unlucky or it just happened. So there's a bit this. What's interesting. There's a bit this idea that it's culturally conditioned. What failure is and what is success. It's not like objective set in stone, but it's a certain culture that sets these boundaries or attempts to define these boundaries, which I think is quite interesting.
And also the notion of, it's also the decision whether you find it as a failure or is it successful, because it's always making this distinction or like kind of deciding that this is something that I wasn't expecting to have or just that.
Yeah. Okay.
And also just to add for people who don't know German, in German, the translation of failure, in Austria we speak German as well, the translation of failure is not nice at all. It means versagen, it means you fucked up completely. It's not anyone else's fault, it's you messed up and there's no one else you can blame for it. That's the German truth. So the Lithuanian and Estonian one is much nicer. Maybe you want to switch to my work?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a work that I chose when Paul approached me. It's a book I'm working on where I've set myself the structure of working only within diptychs. So always two images put together. And I thought that this work was fitting or made sense for this project in terms of failure, because I felt, or in my working process, the edit is extremely important to me. The edit, when I go through the images and I make decisions, the moment it takes a very long time, and the moment I do this, I make a decision of what is a successful image or what is a failed image. This process is the process how I get to know my work and how I kind of find out what I want to say and where I want to go with it. Because mostly when I work, it is not so much that I know exactly what I want, but I always know exactly what I don't want. So I kind of let that lead me in a way. And with this idea of the diptychs, my idea was that I felt that one image was not enough to say what I wanted to say. And so I had this structure of the diptychs in a way helped me, that I felt that taking just one photograph and saying something just never felt accurate. And I felt that in this project, the actual image is the dialogue between the two images. The decisions that I've made, how to put two images together and how they relate to each other. So a lot of them, maybe if you want to go to the next one, a lot of them are kind of opposites. So one, like for example with this one, you see a mass of people, there's many people together, there's stress going on, and then, I mean, this is explained quite simply now, and you have one person that is kind of walking away from it and is being lonesome, I guess. So, just because generally I felt that with all things within my practice, I always felt that things are never just one thing, there are always two, there's always an opposite to everything that I wanted to say, and that things were always much more complex than just saying it is this one thing, and that's what I have to say. So in a way, you guys want to come sit here with us?
No, you can't see it. Come.
You can see it also with the projector.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, Sonia will not see anything from there.
Look, I'm fine. It's perfect.
Welcome. Yes, so in a sense, I guess the idea that photography involves, if you have one photograph, you have to make a choice for one, in a sense, that failed me, that notion. So I felt I need to, that one thing that I want to say happens between the two. And in terms of how I work, you can see with, for example, this set of diptychs, obviously one image is turned around. That's not a failure, that one did that on purpose. And I do that a lot actually with my works, that I turn them around in order to have a more abstract feeling to them. I relate in my works mainly to painting. That means that I envision the works painted rather than photographed. The composition is extremely important to me, so half of the works I compose, the other ones are found images, but I never say which works are found images and which are constructed. And the constructed ones, my aim is always to construct them in a way that you don't see that they are constructed. So it's not like the message of the image would then be, hey, woo, a constructed image. That's not the foreground of it.
But do you mean found as found images? Or
Found images
as
in the
taken?
sense of, taken or found. That's you can, things that I find happening in the world, and I'm fast enough to make an image out of it. And yeah, lastly, as you can see in this image a little bit, a lot of my images are only actually fragments of images, and they are all shot analog. So I actually take a much wider frame of a situation, and then afterwards in the edit, when I basically have much more time to actually look at a certain reality that I've captured, I then go into the image and I cut out a tiny frame of it, and because it's analog, the images become quite grainy and a little bit more loose in a sense, so you have a bit of a painterly pictorial effect, if you want to call it that.
I thought that one of the really interesting things about these two images since they're up is just what you say is that the inversion of that image on the left allows the colour to kind of pulse through, so you almost have, red, white, black on the boy's jumper that seems to kind of emerge out of the image, and it's interesting the way it kind of, just a simple inversion can kind of degrade the image from within. And then also on her coat, which seem, it's almost like monochrome or abstract painting that's somehow embedded in the image. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, because both of the images, they seem to be, the kind of moments in time that normally would not necessarily be perceived, let alone remembered, somebody walking past a moment in a party. So in a way, because failure seems something to do also with waste, or the stuff that gets left behind and then perhaps in this project gets recovered. But I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that idea of these sort of being these kind of like a hiatus or an interval that you then retrieve through the photographic image.
I guess to me there's maybe two things that might be an answer to that is firstly that in terms of the edit, what I spoke before, I felt the longer I was working with photography and the longer my edits took, that sometimes or most of the time actually, the image, when I would get my film back, there were these photographs which kind of like were amazing at the first glance, and I thought, oh yeah, that's obviously like a great photograph. And then other ones who maybe were not at the first glance so spectacular, but then, and I print out a lot of my images, the ones that kind of make it in my final selection, and as I said, it's a very long process, and then I hang them in my studio and I look at them for a very long time, and I let time pass, and then I come back and I look at them again. And there are some images that die on me really fast, and some that survive me. And the ones that survive me are mostly the ones that are actually the ones that were not really spectacular in the beginning. Because the longer I look at them, then more I see, and then more they kind of, then more there is in this image. And the other ones that are often thought in the first glance were really great photographs are the ones that kind of betray me. Because they're like being all super in the beginning, but then they die on me really fast because sometimes things that are immediate are also too simple and they just become another great photograph, and it is often nothing that is my own. And there is also, I guess, a certain bravery that you have to sometimes stick to certain ideas that you have of what you want to say, which are maybe not so obvious, or where you might know that maybe other people will be like, but this other photograph is so much better. And you'll be like, no, like I've stared at these two photographs now for 3 months in my studio, and I tell you the other one is much more interesting. So, yeah, so that's, I guess, the one thing. And what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, you asked me about the. Can't be that important.
Maybe the idea of these images at a glance.
Oh yeah, that's
Inspiration.
yeah. Again, as I said, like this taking or making a choice for an image that might not be in the first place the one that you might think is like the winner image. I think is the one side of it, and the other side is that. In all of my works, and also in other series, not in just that, I'm always like we talked before. It is true that with all of my works, because I'm always interested in a certain duality and in what you might call an image that is more like a glance, like that you glance at it, or it's more like a bypass, and it's not necessarily one moment. Because there is something within me, as I said, that doesn't believe in things that are too simple by saying it is just that one thing. And there is a certain harshness sometimes to photography by having these photographs, especially when people are photographed, that are this boom, it's this one thing. And then to me that is often just too simple. And that's why the longer I work, the more I realized it is actually true that it is, in most of my photographs you can mostly never really see a face, because I feel a face expression is extremely definite in a way. There's often people walking away, they're always in passing, in transit, or they're waiting. And to some people this might be boring, but to me these are actually moments that I'm really interested in. When not one distinct thing is happening, but when there is a moment where there's space for things to open up, for a certain duality to happen, rather than just one thing.
I think what's interesting about what you say, there's the way in which something like indeterminacy, which photographically in terms of like the documentary image, indeterminacy in a certain sense might be seen as a failure. And yet, in your work, you caught a degree of indeterminacy, so it's never quite sure what's happening. And it reminded me, it's totally different, but it reminded me of the way someone like Edward Hopper will make paintings, and the subjects that he chooses are subjects seen through windows when he's travelling in a car or on a train. And in a way, it's the stuff that you normally forget. And so therefore indeterminate in the way we understand memory. But I wondered, and it's a broader question, because that way in which something like the failure of the image will then turn into its success, or the successful image for you will think the failure of the photographer, that's a bad photography. But in a way, the way in which those oppositions kind of slide into one another, the premise of the book, in a certain sense, recovers failure as something that perhaps you don't want to use successful, but is productive or generative, has a certain potentiality. And I wondered for the both of you, or just in general, like that way, I guess one of the problems is that you just recover failure as yet another trope that you employ in order to generate art, which is great, but also would then, make it indeterminate. And I wondered if you guys had thoughts on just that, the way in which those oppositions slide into one another.
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, it's always a sort of a danger of a project that tries to be built on one subject to sort of almost fetishize it, to fetishize failure and say like this is cool. And of course, that's what you don't want to do. But my interest was not to say that, look, these are interesting failures, let's look at them, but more to explore the line between failure and success, and maybe to show that it's really thinner, and really these categories of this is failure, this is success are not so defined as such, and the works can migrate from one to another, and that maybe we should it helps us rethinking the very categories. And I was thinking also that there's this, I thought this was beautiful, written by French philosopher Jacques Attali, who wrote it in a very different context, talking about music, and he wrote that nothing essential happens in the absence of noise. So this idea that noise, which is like a waste product of music, is something so essential, I think fits here as well, that failure and so-called successful images are not really like two different, but are part of the same practice that informs one another, and part of the same practice we call photography. So I think, yes, yeah.
Did you, in your process, encounter a photographer that said, "I've failed a number of times, here are my failures, and then at the end, I succeeded. Here, I didn't fail anymore in this process." So, constantly trying to reach something, failed again, failed again, failed again, and now I succeeded. Did you encounter somebody like that? Or a process like that?
Yeah, you mean like a series of works that would, I think, like not exactly in the sense that they would try, and then something, then boom, like something is really successful. But there are a certain series that are meant to be experiments or exercises in the book. For example, US artist Yael Eban shows work in the book, which is she took a road trip in US and was shooting each image every day from her car window, sort of like Lee Friedlander inspired exercise. And she said she couldn't use it anywhere, but it was such a great experience for her, and such a formative experience that you don't see. It's nowhere to show it, but it informed her practice and it informed her way of thinking. And I think this relates a little bit that culturally we often need to show results. Like when we get a grant, you need to show results. So you don't show the process, which might be equally important. And I think this is a little bit about that as well, the value of the process, the value of the process image, the value of experimentation.
It was in his last seminars read on that, it's called Preparation of the Novel, that he wrote just before he got hit by a laundry van in Paris. And he was writing a novel that he never wrote, a bit like Proust. But he had an idea of the work as, he described it, the work as maquette. And that the maquette, in a way, was a kind of failed object. And I have the quote, so I wouldn't remember it. But he said the work as maquette presents itself as its own experimentation. So that somehow this work, which is provisional, open-ended, in process, functions as a maquette, something that you can then build onto. And I think in some ways, even the failed object that you put in the book, in a way it does seem to function productively as a maquette, not necessarily that it then becomes the work itself, but it does lead on to further things, and photography seems to be dealing so much with the final image that it's interesting, that might recover like an image in process, which seems like an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms because it's so finite and fixed and so on. But I think that idea of that you might be thinking with images and a thought in process and a maquette building up onto something else is maybe a productive way of thinking about it, perhaps.
Yeah.
I just, while you were talking about failure in German and in these languages, I just want to mention, are there any Finns here?
Yes.
No? Where? Okay. One thing I have to say about Finland, they actually have a national day of failure. I think it's October 13th. And he celebrated failure. And the second point is, Donald Duck comics sell many more than Mickey Mouse, because Donald Duck fails all the time and they appreciate that he's trying. So I just thought that would, your book will probably be very popular.
Yeah. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, so considering the both like a preparation of a novel about Rumbold and the former Christians, like Maurice Brancho mentioned about how say when you're alive, like you are about to die, you have a conscious like you are about to die, but you are still alive. And when you're dead, you don't know if you're dead. So like somebody need mourning. Same thing about mourning for the Rumbold. So he made a maquette, but still he made a Vita Nova. He tries to write still his novel. He left only 8 A4 papers yet. So in that sense, like for the failure is a definition of a mourning. So maybe editor or some other people can say like later on like it might be a failure. But in case if artists say like this is my failure, is it success as like he mentioned? So it's kind of more substantial thing, kind of a say antithesis of a Dasein question. So how do you define this kind of a failure as a result to show like a more like a maquette you explained, or this is kind of final somehow kind of the different type of heaven of failure?
I think there's a general definition of failure that we can come up with, and it's very case by case, image per image, I think. But I think the example that you give, Roland Barthes or Marcel Proust, spending his whole life writing a novel, and then at the end of the novel says that now it's time to write it, is in a way a kind of model of thought, and then it blurs that distinction between success and failure just in a productive way. I don't understand fully the Dasein reference because I'm not Heideggerian, but
Maurice Brancho meant that you cannot die, you can't define like a death status. So you cannot have a die, like death is not your thing, like Heidegger mentioned. So Brancho criticized this notion that you don't know when you are dead. So which means that death is expanded and suspended and it's continuous. It's more like a Derridian way of understanding, like maybe is always sliding into the definition. So you never reach the definition of the end. So always slide into maybe, postpone. And for me, failure is this kind of a process. Yeah. So this is one where this maybe is have a giving form.
But I think also if you're saying that maybe or that in between when you don't know something and you can't reach it in a way, if I would relate that for example to my project here, you could also call it failure in a sense that I feel that certain things to me are too great in order to say it through my work. So I'm failing in that sense because that idea that I have of for example, in that book, there are a lot of opposites like this, where you have a mass, you have a unity of a lot of people together, and you have lonesomeness, or you have a person that is extremely exhausted, versus an image where there is someone shown who's extremely strong and outgoing and maybe nearly aggressive. There's always, and to me, it is that I feel that maybe I didn't feel like I have the capacity to show all that in one image. That's why I always needed two. I was failing constantly because it felt to me that this duality of life is too grand for me to explain in one image. And also through that my photography is quite personal to me. What it means to be me and to be a woman means that I'm never just outgoing and want to show myself. I'm also at the same time always extremely shy and want to hide. I love being in a mass of people with a lot of people, but at the same time I enjoy being with a lot of people. At the same time I really need to be by myself and love nothing more than not having to deal with others. And I always felt that I was always failing to talk about this with just one comment or one image. So this kind of maybe state where you want to say this, you also want to say that, but what you actually want to say is here and you don't really know how to grasp it and needed two opposites to kind of get there. But what I actually want to say is not physically there, it's between them. So that's this maybe state where I failed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess this relates to what we were talking a bit earlier, that sort of failure is open to interpretation, and this underlies potential, and if you should, I guess, not close the doors to that. I wonder if we should move on and show a couple of more examples to make it a bit more concrete. So maybe we can talk about this work, which is slightly different, quite specific within the framework of this project. So this is a series of works by Polish photographer called Ognised from Poland, and he was working in Iran and Iraq, and his interest was the Iranian-Iraqi war. Especially he was documenting how it is represented in museums. So he went in Iraq and documented how the war is represented in Iran museums, and then went to Iraq and did the same. And while he was in Iran, he noticed that there are lots of people with this plaster on the nose. So, and apparently he then learned that Iran is, together with the US, one of the 2 leader countries for nose jobs, for nose surgeries. But what's quite specific to Iran is that people show it off like proudly. When someone would do it in the US, they would hide at home so nobody knows, and then they come out all beautiful, and suddenly friends think, oh, you're so nice now. Yes. But there in Iran, it's sort of a status, a symbol of status, if you can afford to do that. And this work relates to failure on 2 levels. At first, this is a failure because he never managed to use this work. It didn't fit his. So these are, again, orphaned images that didn't have a platform to show. But there's this another notion that the face is somehow something that needs to be corrected. So the face is not, is somehow a bit of a failure, that you need to correct it. And what's quite interesting is that those people, they often say, when they go to these surgeons, they say that they bring a picture of like a Hollywood star, and they say, I want like, I don't know, Tom Cruise nose. So it's through these images that they compare their face, and then they realize that their face is somehow of a lesser quality in some way. And I think it's, there's something quite interesting about this. Would you like to?
I think what you said about it replaying the failure with the image. Just what the point, or part of the point was that failure is embedded in the image as well as it is about failure. Maybe we can show the other ones of the other images. Would you want to continue with this?
Yeah.
Can I ask something if you know that? Because what I find actually interesting is the difference between, like you said, in the US, no one would show their plaster, and here they are. Do you know if this has something to do with plastic surgery being expensive and only people who are rich can afford it? That's why they're showing their plaster? Because what's the reason for it otherwise, to walk around with a plaster on your nose? Obviously saying, yeah, I did plastic surgery because I had a super ugly nose.
Yeah, actually it's written in his text, right? There was also written that families actually take loans to get those surgeries done, so I guess it's really connected to the wealthiness. Yes, status, and they also put here the fake ones on it. I wonder how long will they have the fake ones on? I mean, you can't have it for forever.
A few more weeks and get your money's worth out for a year.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure it's kind of the status situation.
Maybe it's a sign of creativity.
Yeah?
I know a better nose.
You're right. Makes sense.
You could do that without even having the plastic surgery. You could just put that on and it would look up to you.
But that's exactly what people in Iran do. So some put like a fake, so that's a sign that, yeah, I guess. Yes. Yes. So wait. Right, I will ask you, is there something like specific work that you would like to maybe stop a little bit?
I thought maybe just on the sorry, and just think a little bit about. Actually, maybe we can go. No, sorry, actually go back to those ones. Please, others. But one of the interesting questions that the book rose, in my view anyway, when we were talking at the beginning and thinking about the ways in which what I could really say about these images. And this one's by Jason Fulford, if I remember.
Yeah.
And he was very interested in the cliche and the nature of the cliche, what it meant to photograph something that was in a certain sense prohibited. So that sign, do not read, doubles up as a kind of injunction not to photograph these sort of magazines and the Japanese, I think, newsagents. And it was interesting just the way in which there is this sort of image, although he took it as a failure, could also be seen as a small transgression, because that anxiety that we have around cliches and around what I imagine in the essay would be the already seen, the desire for originality to produce an image that's not been seen before, that becomes increasingly difficult in an age that's so mediated by the image. And I thought it was kind of interesting that an image like this could function in both ways. On the one hand, it is a cliche and you know, it's too good to be photographed. But on the other hand, that sense of, you know, what it means in a kind of image society, there may be a certain truth to the cliche, in the same way that there may be a kind of success and failure of these kinds of inversions. And the same happened with Athena Tori when she went on a hike, and she saw this mountain view, and I don't actually remember where she was, but in a way it doesn't matter because she took the photo because she felt impelled, almost sort of forced to take an image of this mountain view because it fitted certain aesthetic criteria, you know, the kind of kitsch, cliched mountain view that you feel obliged to take, irrespective of the fact that you know that there will be better images out there, and that in a way that image, you know, has been probably taken before many times. But it's interesting the way in which there is something, or it suggests not only a failure, but also something else around the compulsions that we feel around image taking. That, you know, image taking might be in some ways related to pathology, you know, the compulsion to take, to record, to share. And I thought these images in some ways, I'm not actually sure what the image on the right is. What is it? Garbage. It looks like a moonscape. Garbage. Is it garbage?
Yeah.
Well, it's a nice picture. But it was just interesting because in a way that compulsion, you know, from the images like this, which are totally kind of generic, kind of waste products as well, the kind of residue of a kind of bombardment of images so that you do get an image as waste. But that kind of compulsion to record takes us so far from the kind of tourist looking at a landscape, the residues of a kind of romantic imaginary, all the way up to the kind of selfies that take place in somewhere like Abu Ghraib. Is kind of, and it's a perverse juxtaposition, it doesn't work, but there is this kind of madness and, you know, pathology that underlies these sorts of images, and I thought it was kind of interesting the way in which something so banal can nevertheless lend itself perhaps to some form of productive thinking around the cliche.
I can just comment that when you were talking about the situation when you feel the urge to photograph, just knowing that you should do it, reminded me of those spots which are also in Japan and somewhere else where like it's made for tourists to take photographs from a certain situation from a certain angle to get the best picture of it. And actually it also creates the kind of cliche and everybody would get the same photographs in their family album, so it's kind of also becomes a failure, although it's thought about making it as a successful image, but then again it reverses itself. Yeah.
So I wonder maybe this is a good time to open it up and maybe open it up a little bit and for questions or comments or ideas.
I would like to ask the artist Is it important? And how it is coming back to your failures, to your archives and going through those failures and finding maybe them successful, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly within those failures, there's always the potentiality in it. So it's, I mean, whether you will forget about it, that you had even the photograph, and then, or you will come back to it and maybe find, yeah, exactly the right time and location and place for it, and become like reversed in that sense. So it's, I mean, the question of decision, and then also, I mean, as I before mentioned, that it's kind of the process, or the failure is always the process or the tryout. So it leads to somewhere further. So I mean, it's somehow also important in that sequence.
For me, it's extremely important to do that because I also feel that there's a difference between my eyes looking at my work 5 years ago and my eyes looking at my work now. So I make decisions, but when I say images die on me or I throw them out, I don't really kill them. No, but I always keep a very big archive. I don't really throw anything away, and I go back to it all the time because just through the fact that I know so much more now that I know when I only started working with photography, it's like you're training your eyes, your thoughts, everything. I mean, you are evolving, so a different person is looking at the work. So I think what you said now is extremely important to do. And even if it doesn't lead to anything, but just as a practice to kind of get a better feeling for your own work, I think this is really important. To me it is.
Yeah. Do you need a mic or?
No, I don't. Well, I don't hope. I'm curious for you to talk a little bit more what you said about at the beginning, that you feel like photography is more prone to fail than other types of work, I like whether I agree or not, I don't know, but it still makes sense to focus on photography, like, and its failures in the book. But I just wondered if you could talk about that, and if any of you had thoughts about that also.
Do you want something? Or should I? I guess this was one of the beginning ideas, like this hypothesis that was one of the sparkles for the project. But I didn't necessarily think that that's the case. But I thought that there is something definitely to say about this long tradition of photography being this fixed one image, which is related to reality in such a strong way. What Roland Barthes said that that has been, so that has really happened. So if you take something away, the photograph wouldn't exist of this object. And I think this really strict relation is prone to failing because it's so constructed. It's so sort of strict and narrow. And I think there's something about that. And why I like Ryan's work that I showed at the beginning, these fixed images, because it deals with this history. There's a book by German philosopher Peter Geimer that is called the Original Accident, and he talks about how the photography history is actually way more accidental than we usually perceive. That these are accidents that we think are these great images that make this history of photography in capital letters. So they're way more accidental. And he talks, there's a nice story about X-ray, how the first X-ray were actually almost accidental. Someone was looking for a coin and he didn't know in which box. He had so many boxes. So he sort of thought it through and he had some knowledge and made this X-ray. But he didn't think of it all the way to monetize it. And then Röntgen was the one who had this vision. And there's always this market pressure, I guess, which makes something also a success. But I thought that it is in this way that photography is interesting because of this critical tradition in photography, this notion of the index also, and this notion that photography has this such a strong relationship, and also this idea that there is one image that really tells you about reality, that this decisive moment sort of image, that there you have it, and it's better than the eye. And the camera has this tradition to be compared with the eye, what Thierry Ledoux called the infallible eye of the camera, as it's somehow better than vision. So this was my sort of interest in this. Yeah.
I've just been doing a bunch of reading recently about like the history of photography and objectivity, like in terms of scientific imaging in the like 19th century, and sort of changing. And there's been a bunch of interesting things that have come up in the reading about like when the photograph that's trying to sort of like explain some like anomaly or some weirdness with the human body or something, it's not like you need something realer than real to actually communicate this to the people that are trying to learn from the image. So in order to kind of, so there's this debate about like, you know, no, it should be like mechanical and real, or no, in order to sort of pull out what we're actually trying to like learn from, we have to manipulate it or draw back into it or do something. So I mean, what you're saying is sort of the same thing.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this historical context when photography was instituted in France in 19th century. So it was Daguerre's friend François Aragon, who was a representative in the parliament, who convinced the French parliament to buy his patent, basically institutionalized photography. So his all argument, his all rhetoric was based on this idea that there is already a class of lens-based scientific instruments, like the microscope or the telescope. And he said photography is the latest invention within this line. So what we have is that we have ability to see the stars or to see what's something really small. And photography allows you to see the moment, to stop the moment. And he said that he gave an example of Egyptian hieroglyphs and how it would take years to sort of to trace them. And he said the camera can do it in like a second or a minute by then. So this scientific legacy of the camera dates way back and it's quite strong. I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it does. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe someone has a question.
I have a question for you. Well, you said at the beginning that when you had the idea for the book, you started approaching photographers and artists that you knew of. But what does that mean? Did you just flip open a phone book, or where did you start?
I'm working with photography project for quite some years. So there is a group of artists that I either work with or whose work I admired, but never had a chance to work with, like Hanna's. So I started contacting them, and then the group got a bit bigger. So for example, Holmboe is someone that I found while doing some research for this project, and I thought, oh, his work is interesting. And so I was also curious what they would say, and the book is very much the outcome of the conversations that we had. So I tried to be more open, and then some of the failures are what I haven't really expected. So there are more interesting examples that I even have envisioned originally. But yeah, there was no. I didn't try to have a certain criteria for these artists. I tried to be as open as possible and contact as many people as possible. So I talked with about 60 something, and there are 47 artists in the book. A lot from Europe or US, but also like from China or South America. So I just try to be as open as possible. Yes?
It strikes me that there is no absolute relationship between the result and failure. Failure is always in the goals you set. So you can't relate it directly to the result. You can only relate it to the goal. If you don't set goals, you can't fail, can you?
I guess this is this idea of expectation and what do you expect the artwork to do is what you're referring to, and yes, it's of course important.
Success, what we talked about. I think that's what. I mean, you were calling it a goal, but we had a discussion about that before, where I said probably the most important thing in this discussion, if we're talking about failure, is to firstly talk about what we mean by success, which is kind of what you're saying. Obviously, you can't fail if there's not a goal. So if we're constantly talking about failure, what's our idea of success? What is a success, and who says what is? I guess that's. And I, in a way, I agree, because I feel that to me it's not even so, I guess, often so interesting what in the end then is success or the failure itself, because to me I hope for this to be something quite personal, or at least that's something that I believe in, but what I'm really interested in is the process, how to get there, which that's why I quite liked your question. If there was a photographer that actually showed how he actually got to what makes his decision to choose this one image that then is for him not a failure, him, her. Because that to me is what is interesting, to understand how a person works and why a person makes certain decisions and how to get to where you want to get. That process, I think, is quite interesting.
Yeah, and I know a lot of painters that hope not to fail in their next painting. Yeah? And they are accepting failure for years and years in the hope that it will, in the end, be there.
But also, I just remember the project where you can see what you were asking before, that you can see sort of this line of thinking that leads to a successful image is by Dutch photographer Elspeth Diedrichs. And her project is Things as They Are. And it's a book where she shows, like, in smaller pages, maybe 20 to 25 images that leads to the final image. So there are process images in the book, which I think is quite interesting. It's an exciting project.
I think actually in that Baldessari image is quite nice, because if we're talking about, in a way these questions emerge out of this John Baldessari photograph, it's quite well known, but obviously composition is entirely wrong. But the question that he raises there is very interesting at a time when matters of taste, aesthetic judgment, skill, originality, all these kind of questions are totally thrown into question. And so how can you, this idea of success is, even though that is in a certain sense a very successful work. And then in this one work that I thought was kind of great that he did, it's just 4 balls thrown into the air in order to make a square. And in a way, Baldessari is someone who's very interested in using photography to document, in a sense, of performance. Something as banal as throwing balls into the air. But he courts failure, and it's these are images in process, I think, in that way, that maybe there is a goal, but the goal is totally arbitrary, and that the process is the only thing that matters within that kind of.
Yeah, I also have a note on that there's this other aspect in the book which is maybe not so clear in the photos presented in the book, but for example, there's this other aspect of failure which comes through in the book, that in the typeface we use. So we use the typeface which is called Arial Grotesque, which is based on the it's a redesign of Arial, which is then, at the moment when this was drawn, it wasn't a failure. It was deemed as a failure by history or by other type design professionals. So it's like collectively thought as a failed typeface. So the typeface we use here is basically Arial, but then it's a redesigned version by an Italian type designer who then tries to correct the typeface, which is of course very subjective in itself. But in this case, this kind of failure, happens because of history or the process. Yeah.
What I also found interesting, because you said painting just now, in terms of failure, I mean, failure also has a lot to do with, or talking about failure relates to self-doubt. And a very good friend of mine is a professor of painting, and he told me, and I also experienced that in my circles of friends where there are a lot of artists, is that there's also a difference how you talk about failure and self-doubt relating to if you're a man or if you're a woman. when it comes to students, I talked to this friend of mine who's a professor who's teaching painting, and when you have female students, they tend to talk a lot about their self-doubt and how they struggle and how they're not sure about things, and how they think that maybe they should even stop painting and blah blah blah. And even though this may sound like a cliche, but I really trust him with that, and I have also been teaching at the university, and also from my friends, I have to say that I feel this is true, and that is something that is interesting as well, is that for men, it is quite different. They just show their work and they say, this is it, and yeah, this is it, and it's good, isn't it? I mean, and I'm not saying that that is something that they really believe in it, but I think it's probably like a 50-50 chance, but I think there may be a lot of young men who really believe that they are the most amazing painters and they have it within them and that they really believe this. But I'm sure that there's also a lot of men who say this, they don't believe it, but they have been brought up in a way where as a man you can't really show that you are actually insecure and that you don't know and that you have no idea if this is really a good painting or not. And so I think if we talk about failure, obviously when we also have to talk about the fact who talks about failure, how to talk about failure, and that there's differences between male and female failure, I guess, or how people talk about it, and obviously then this could go on forever about the scholaring women in arts, the history is much shorter than for men, so it is also it's a question of gender as well, how you talk about this.
Yeah.
I like that point. Thanks. but it also makes me think in general. I mean, back to the question of how success is defined in the first place. But I always thought it was kind of interesting that, like, when doing a studio visit, you're supposed to convince this person who's there why your work is so great. But I feel like even people who have made work that they think is good, or that might be a success for themselves, like most artists being self-critical or being ready to move on to the next thing, have already found fault in the successful thing so that they can go on to move on to the next thing. And so it's just like, just because you've made something that is not a failure, in quotes, like it's still kind of a failure because you still have to do the next thing anyway. Or it still sort of moves you to the next. It's like a process thing.
Or it can be a failure later on. I mean, that also happens. That people think at some point in their career that is amazing, and 5 years later they say, oh, that was really not.
And so yeah, I'm interested in this sort of space of having to pretend that something is a success. Or not pretend, but how you have to live with it being success and failure at the same time. And or if you're sort of in question about something, but you still believe in it enough that you want someone to show it. And there's space there, I guess.
And that also leads to what we have been talking about today shortly, of also different academic ways of teaching students that, let's say, maybe in the US is also a bit different than in Europe, where it's a question how you also teach students to talk about their work. It's always important to basically sell yourself and not talk about yourself out, where that can also be questions if that's a good thing or not. And then at the same time, art itself being something that is kind of like a very free field. So if you're not even going to believe in it yourself, who is going to believe in it? I mean, that's a very interesting but tricky question. But generally, I do feel sometimes also coming back just very shortly to this female-male question is also that I sometimes feel that if, and you can agree, disagree with me now, because I know it's a little bit devil's advocate what I'm going to say now, but sometimes I do feel that if a male artist is talking about his self-doubt, everyone kind of thinks it's charming because he's so sensitive and he's showing his wounds. Where if a woman is being I don't know, and maybe saying it in a shy way, people don't even listen to her anymore. It's I mean, I don't know. I'm always very interested not in just what people say, but obviously all that comes with it, and yeah.
The definition of failure probably is a tricky thing. I think if we spend 24 hours here, it would be not enough to go away with a definition that everybody are happy. I think we saw many images we wanted to object, we wanted to say no, this is not a failure. It's a great image and it could be exposed, for example, in our gallery or whatever. And what is important, I think, here, what you notice is the relation between artist and the image piece proposed in the book. And my question is, can failure become a strategy? And if it becomes a strategy, is it still failure? So,
I think it's for Rye.
But I think that was one of the questions that I thought straight away around the dangers of failure becoming a sort of fetish in a certain way that you could, or becomes a trope. I think the most important thing probably is to see the open-endedness that maybe comes with it as opposed to the closed world of a successful work. But yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it is. I don't know. I think it feels maybe that it's something to do with the idea of goals and just, or, with that Baldessari work, or the idea of allowing chance or doubt into your process. I remember my supervisor a while ago, I was doubting things, and she said, well, if you doubt, then inscribe doubt into your argument, which felt very alien to me, because I'm a guy. But in any case, it just, I think, it doesn't, I think it's almost a sort of outlook or worldview that you allow chance, you allow indeterminacy, you allow openness and the process of making and so on, and all of that sort of fills in, because in the end, whatever these works are here, like you say, many of them are brilliant, it seems to me, and I wanted to write about some of them, so I don't want to write about things that are failures and that kind of, and so I think maybe perhaps the sort of, the way to think about it is more to do with something like outlook, and then, Hanna used the word brave, but in a way it is that the artist should include things that lay bare the manner in which they work and should reveal the process of making and so on, and in that way there's a kind of certain, perhaps, vulnerability or something around that I think is maybe interesting. And then that it might then be recovered for sure, because also the fact that an artwork fails or doesn't fail won't prevent it from working very well in the market, and in that sense it doesn't. But maybe those questions, that's already there, and I think, so to me perhaps the way I see it is something like a kind of a way of thinking and a way of working that is more provisional.
Yeah, so I guess we have time for one last question, right? Yeah, so does anyone has... Yeah, go ahead.
Say, I've been listening to these last moments from the perspective of a designer, like as a graphic designer. I'm always, I guess, dealing with these questions of a kind of universal rightness of doing something, which I feel based on this book becomes very clear that it's so subjective to do photography or art, maybe. I mean, there is this big catchphrase that designers love to throw out there, is that design has to work and art doesn't. And it's basically like about that you have to convey some sort of universal qualities in design. And it becomes clear in the examples in the book that the artist has wanted to convey something and then feels like they have failed somehow. I don't know, it's just a bit weird to think about these universal qualities that you could have in photography. For example, I'm still thinking about the tourist photography example that Kristina said. Like, what is it? Is the failure in taking the same photograph over and over again? In some sense, it's about maybe even aura in this tourist place, that you feel proud that everyone in their family has the same photographer, something like that. I mean, it's so amazingly subjective somehow what kind of goals you can, have in different settings.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer it. I guess we talked a little bit about this before, but just to pick on this tourist photography, it's you often take pictures there because you know that these pictures were already taken and that a lot of people took these images. And there's this nice place in Don DeLillo's book, White Noise, where the protagonist family go to what is the most photographed barn in America. And that it is famous only because it is the most photographed barn and it has no other function. So this idea that the circulation adds value, I think it's quite important. And the touristic images were perhaps the first widely circulated personal images. Because if you would go, like my grandfather went on a trip to US in the late 80s, which was still like a tricky thing to do from Soviet Union. And then he would show all his colleagues and almost all the town, like the images, and would share stories, and that would be like the circulated images from his time. So I think there's something about touristic images and this idea that you circulate them, and they have to be somehow recognizable, I guess.
I was actually thinking about that today when I walked through the old town of Tallinn, because I've never been here before, and there's tons of tourists and a lot of Japanese people, and I stopped once watching a group of Japanese tourists where there was the one lady explaining what everything is about in Tallinn, and you had like maybe 3 people listening to her, and then what felt like 20 people, 20 very energetic Japanese people taking pictures, not really listening to what the lady was saying. And particularly taking pictures of each other, pointing at the things that were important. And they had so much fun doing that. And they made like jokes. They were like, there was a statue with like some hair, and the woman had similar hair, and they were like putting the hair together. It was super funny, and everyone laughed, and they were taking pictures. And they would like literally nearly run to the next point and take the next picture again. And I was actually thinking about this idea that these are tours, so these are places that you can find that on the internet. There's no need to actually take that picture to really like show it to someone, obviously. But then I was thinking, if it is a difference in your way of seeing, how you see things. If you walk around just looking at things half boringly, while a tourist is just as bored as you are, as kind of like saying, this is the church of 1900 and you're just going to stand there and like, but if you are a photographer, hunter, and you have an aim today, you constantly look, like they seem just so excited, they have something to do, and it is to find the right picture and then to show their families at home. So they are really attentive, they really look at things because they want to take a picture. So their way of seeing is also different. At least I noticed for myself that I see the world differently when I walk around and I have my camera with me, because I'm trying to think in pictures that I might take. Whereas if I don't have my camera with me, I don't always see the same things because I'm maybe more in thoughts, or I'm, you know what I mean? So maybe it's not so much about the picture that they're taking, but also in times of constant flow of everything and everyone having quite a short attention span. This is also a way of helping to find attention for the eyes to photograph things, this kind of touristic way of photographing. It's like hunting for the best image that you then have. Maybe it's more about that than about the actual image of that woman holding her hair to the statue.
I think we basically ran out of time and have to discuss this, but thank you all for coming and for contributing to this discussion. It's been a pleasure to be here, and yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.